Well, hello and welcome to the Alpha Anywhere demo and Q&A webcast. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Products and Services here at Alpha Software, and I'm pleased to present Dion McCormick, no relation, who is our lead solutions engineer. Also joining us is Sarah Mitchell, who's in charge of our documentation department. So today, Dion is going to talk a little bit, I believe, about the ViewBox control and about the items, the things that actually do things when you click on them in the control. And Sarah will also be here to help look up any documentation questions. And we are all here to answer your questions. So you can go ahead and type those questions into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. So let's get started. Hello, Dion, are you there? And if so, welcome back.
Yes, thank you very much. It was a fabulous trip, a good family trip, and amazingly, we're halfway through August already.
I know it is. Flying by, flying by.
I know, phenomenal. And just to let everybody know, school starts next week, at least for us. A lot of people have already started. So
I heard that, yeah.
There's a lot of celebrating going on out there as kids get back into their regular schedule and off to the races, get back to work, get stuff done.
Exactly.
Anyway, hey, thank you everybody for joining us late summer. And we, again, as Dave mentioned, we got a quick demonstration. This is actually a follow-on with a couple questions we had when we were doing the ViewBox demonstrations a couple weeks ago. And well, actually a little bit farther than that. And there was questions about adding interactivity to the ViewBox. And so today I'm going to show you a little bit more, kind of go into the covers and explain a little bit more how you do that and what the principles are that are associated with that. Along with that, we're here for your questions. So make sure you take the time to go to your Q&A section of the GoToWebinar control panel, put in your questions. We'll be monitoring them. We'll try to do our best to discuss and explain your questions, and if not, we'll always try and get back to you on that. And along with us, we have our esteemed colleague Sarah, who again also I think is suffering from jet lag, is just got back in also. She'll be here helping us out and making sure I stay inside the lines, don't screw things up. So pretty good. Real quick update. The roadmap continues moving along very nicely. The one key thing, and I just want to keep people apprised on this, is we've talked about this a couple times the last few sessions, is that there's a massive amount of updates going on underneath the covers in regards to the UX builder, specifically making it more responsive, faster, easier, and just overall performance improvements. But with that, there's also little glitches and things like that. So if you are using a pre-release, just be wary. You know, we're doing a lot of work on cleaning that up and getting it ready to go, and should have a new production release pretty soon. But again, wanted to give you a heads up that, you know, if you're seeing little strange behaviors with the pre-release, we're not talking about production, but pre-release, just be realized there's a lot of changes on there, and we'll be trying to get those set up and cleared up and ready to go as soon as possible. But I'm already seeing in my experimentation just snappiness. It's a matter of I'm able to open up, edit, modify, etc., and move very quickly through the updated user interface, specifically the UX builder. And a lot of really cool stuff going on the server side in Alpha Cloud, and you'll see that stuff start hitting a little later this year. And I think you're going to be very pleased with what's coming down the road. And Transform, again, lots of changes, lots of improvements, and enormous amount of development work is going into that product. So look for some cool announcements also for Transform coming out in the very near future. And we will be covering that along with Dave, who does our Tuesdays, Transform Tuesdays. We'll be covering that in more detail on that. So if you're interested, give us an email at guides@alphasoftware.com so we can make sure you're included on the Transform side, and off to the races we go. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump in and do a little demonstration. And again, we're here for you. So if you have any questions, go to the Q&A section and put your questions there, and we'll be monitoring that and going through there. So one of the key aspects, obviously, of any project now, especially on the mobile side, is the user interface design, creating a very effective, powerful, pretty, and easy to use user interface. And really the iPhone, and more importantly, the whole smartphone generation has really driven that and amazing, and just changed the whole paradigm of how people interact, and it continues to change and evolve, and Alpha is in a position to take advantage of all that capability. And one of the key factors behind that is the ViewBox control. The ViewBox control has infinite flexibility for you to be able to create any kind of user experience you want for a person. And there's two aspects to the user experience. There's obviously the display aspect, and we talk a lot about that in terms of how do you actually lay out and display the data to the person. And as we demonstrate, and I'll show you real quick again, we're adding a lot of new features and capabilities into this to make it easy for you to create very effective, pretty user interfaces. But beyond that, you're also going to want to create interactivity because people will want to interact with that information. And there's the traditional swipe gestures and things like that, but you'll want to be able to actually detect how the person is interacting with your content that you're providing. And the ViewBox is an ideal control for this because it gives you flexibility of layout, but also has a powerful, powerful capability for you to add interactivity within your system or within the ViewBox to be able to react to how people essentially work with your user interface. And what I want to do is kind of go in a little bit more and talk a little bit more about that interactivity and show you an example of how that works and how you can apply it to your projects there. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump into our Alpha Anywhere development environment. Already got it up and running and set up and ready to go. Real quick process check. Want to just make sure we have good audio.
Good audio, good visual, good everything.
Excellent. Yeah, I think all the networks are working pretty good. So that's pretty good. So again, the ViewBox is a control that's inside of a UX. So I'm going to start out by going ahead and creating an UX component. And I'm going to keep this fairly simple. I'm just going to, basically start with a blank component and start with a blank status. So we'll bring that up here. Go to my controls. I often like to just go ahead and put a panel card in here. Makes things look a little nicer and gives me the basis for what I need to do later. A panel card, again, for people who are a little newer, it's an invisible control that allows you to manipulate what people see and how it's laid out on the screen. Very powerful capabilities there. So very important, the ViewBox is a data control because it's data driven. It doesn't have to be. You can create ViewBoxes that are pure and simple HTML only. That gives you a lot of flexibility. If you just want to bring some HTML and lay it out and have it look good and do all that, you can do that within it. But the more powerful aspect is the ability for you to connect the ViewBox to data. And we're going to actually show that here. So I'm going to go ahead and click ViewBox. And I'm going to go ViewBox items because we're really going to be talking about something called items. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. So that creates our ViewBox there. And since I have a panel card, I'm going to go ahead and go over here to the ViewBox properties and click Fill Container. Now, this ViewBox is essentially empty. If I were to demonstrate it right now and do a whole lot of nothing. So I'm going to go ahead and start modifying this a little bit. So I'm going to go into my ViewBox of items. It takes you immediately into the home page of that. And as you can see, you can click here and there's some built-in functionality, or better yet, documentation. So it gives you some documentation here, but more importantly is you can click here and get even more detailed on our developer documentation side. And you can also load in sample ViewBoxes. We have a number of different samples that you can bring in, so you don't have to start from scratch, even though I'm going to do that today. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to data source. Currently, this is defined as HTML. That means it's not really connected to data, and I want it to actually be connected to data. So I'm going to select from here data and click OK. Now that I've done that, I've been given some more options. And my options are, where am I going to get my data from? And this is really fun. You have a number of different ones. We're going to use static JSON today, but you can use a database query. You can use a JavaScript function if it's local. You could use a list control that's been downloaded. And also you can use directly to a REST API, which we demonstrated a while back. And that's a lot of fun because now you can kind of get rid of the middleman and connect directly to your REST APIs and create user interfaces on top of that. And we're going to be exploring that more and more because the cool thing about that is that's it's insanely fast and very flexible and gives you a really cool development paradigm to work with. But I'm going to go ahead and select static JSON here. Now that I've done that, it's asking me, well, I need some static JSON. So I open up my static JSON and I can start putting in some JSON here, yada, yada, yada. But conveniently, we have some sample data. So I'm going to click sample data. And here are a number of different ones here, but I'm going to go ahead and click names. And this will put some static JSON in there. This is a JSON array, which includes a set of JSON objects here surrounded by an array symbol, which is the open square bracket, close square bracket at the end. So this gives me some data here. Notice there's a lot of functionality here. First, you can view it, you can validate JSON. So if you pasted some in there, you got to make sure it's okay. You can insert icon information in here. You can also insert this in a carriage return line feed. So if you're more comfortable or have that data in that format, you can put that in here. But I've now got my static JSON. Now, since I pasted in my static JSON, Alpha in the ViewBox control analyzed this and pulled out my field name. So you can see I have a field name and a value, field name, value, etc. So I'll go there and I go to my fields and you'll see, it's pulled out those 4 fields that are in all of my JSON data there. So it's very flexible. It's kind of on the fly and analyzing my information there. Now I'm going to go ahead and skip over here to ViewBox layout. And this is where I can go ahead and create my layout. So I'm going to go ahead and click add item down here. And you'll notice that we have a bunch of different items you can add, but I'm going to go ahead and select data controls and I'm going to highlight all of those and put them on here. So this is very similar to the work you do in a UX builder, adding different fields, etc. Now, one thing I love about the ViewBox editor is we have a built-in preview function. So you don't have to actually save and run the UX. You can kind of check it out right here. So I'm going to click preview. And in a moment, it's going to combine my JSON and my layout. And you'll see it's putting in first customer, second customer. And I can see right now, well, it's not exactly formatted the way I want it. So I'm going to do some formatting and cleaning up from now. But you can see it's taking my JSON data, merging it with my ViewBox layout and creating this output here. So I'm going to go back to my layout editor and I can do things like I can add containers. I can make this look like a list control. I can use layout. I can use tabs. There's a lot of flexibility in terms of how you do that. Plus, we have a number of different other kind of predefined controls that you can use for, say, form edits, etc. when you're using this more for a form view kind of scenario. And you can see also we can insert other controls in here in terms of maps, buttons, images, etc. So the sky is a limit. But what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and here and click Freeform Edit, and it basically takes it from a genie metaphor into a freeform editor. So I can go in and start changing this. So for instance, the first thing I want to do is I want all these to be on the same line, even though they're kind of set up right now. It's HTML, so it ignores carriage returns, etc. But what I want to do is I want to have at the beginning of each of these on an individual line. So think of this as a layout for a single record, and then it's going to iterate through the number of records to create the output that I'm looking for. So now that I've done a little bit of editing here, I can click preview and you'll see now it's starting to look a little better. We have each sort of record has their own line and I'm using that break to kind of move between records from there. But I can go in here and have some more fun with it and go, okay, let's go ahead and put in here first name, colon. Let's go ahead and put in last name, colon. And then city, colon, and state. And this is all pure just HTML. So the neat thing about that, and I'll show you in a few moments, you can just grab any HTML and CSS and use it right within the system and it's going to render it. It's still not there. I kind of want to make it look a little bit more visual. So I'm going to go back to my layout here and I'm going to go ahead and put in here. And you'll notice the other thing too is since this is an HTML editor, Alpha has built into it autocomplete. So I can say, oh, I want bold text here. And you can see that it automatically put in the beginning tag and the end tag. So I can cut this and I can say there. I'm going to just do this really quickly just to kind of clean it up. Again, my layout is very crude. A good CSS designer, you can not only use this, but you can use CSS classes and other things like that. So you can really go to town and make it look great. And we'll go from there. And let's see. Okay, so starting to look a little better. It's a little, I would hire someone to do this kind of stuff, so it's a little better there. But now we have something that's useful. So if I click OK, I'm going to go ahead and save this. And I'll go ViewBox, item demonstration 2. Okay. And yeah, turn this on. And I'll go ahead and do the working preview. Okay, and you'll see that basically it just does that same theme of taking the JSON, taking the HTML, and putting it out into my output, and it's within that location there. So real quick, before I dive into the item stuff, I do want to show you something pretty cool. So let me go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and let's see. Yeah, let me put in a panel card right here. I'll go ahead and put in a panel card. And since I have a panel card, I have to put it into a panel layout. I'm going to go ahead and go into my here and add another view box just to kind of show you that my crude attempt template is very crude. So now I can go in here, and I'm not going to make this data driven. Well, I can go ahead and do that. I'll just to make it consistent, I'll make this data, and we'll go static JSON and static sample names. Okay. Now I'm going to go to the ViewBox layout here. And what's cool is, let's see, this is my library. Oh, okay, good. And we showed this about 3 weeks ago. We've started to build in more important and or better looking templates. And again, these are just standard HTML templates. So you'll see I started with the Genie and started from scratch, but I can go in here and grab one of these out here. And you'll see that we have these nice looking templates ready to go out of the gate. So I'm going to go ahead and pick this one and click OK. And what it does is it inserts this HTML and some CSS. So now when I go to preview this, you'll see that it's putting out one of these for each of my data fields or each of my records that are in my data. I haven't made any modifications to it, but as you can see, this looks a lot nicer than mine. So you'll see a lot more of these coming out in the near future as we continue to enhance our library here. But same concept, I have some data there and I can merge it. Now I can go back to my layout here, and let's look at this real quick. We've got a card heading. Let's say we want that to be the last name. So I can go to my ViewBox layout. I can highlight right here where it says card heading, and I can insert a field of last name. So now it's going to put in there. And in fact, let's go ahead and just say comma, and then let's insert the first name. So we have both the information there. And then we can do a preview, and you can see, boom, it's got last name, first name for each one of these. And if I had a URL for an image, I could put that URL as a dynamic element here, and all this text could be replaced here. So very handy stuff, very easy to do it. And I just wanted to show you, and again, it's when you're on the ViewBox layout, you click here for load layout template from library, you'll see that we have these pre-built templates, and many more will be coming very soon. So we're excited about that from there. And again, once you have that base, you can change anything you want within the system here. So I'll save this. I'm going to actually fill this container here. And then we'll get into the meat of what I really want to show you today, which is, okay, and I go to my working preview here, and you'll see that it's going to lay out my top portion is going to be my crude attempt, and then the second portion will be the nicer looking. So you can see, I think if anything you take away from this is use these, you'll get along a lot farther than doing it yourself, unless you're a CSS designer, which is often handy. Okay, so now what I want to do is talk about items. So I'm going to go back into here. So we've done so far is we've really kind of we have a data-driven environment, but there's no interactivity. Nothing occurs when I click or do anything along those lines. And you want the ability for the individual to interact with it. So maybe when they click on a record that you want it to navigate to a different panel or do some other action or trigger something like an AJAX callback. The sky's the limit, but you want to add interactivity to it. So the way you do that is through something called items. And what items are basically just triggers for JavaScript. So let me go ahead and add an item. And I'm going to call this alert test. Just going to call it alert test. Okay, so I have a new item in my view box here. And you can see I've got item name, I've got some behaviors, so it can respond, this item will respond to any one of these JavaScript elements like a click, a right click, a select, a swipe, etc., a down hold. So we have a combination of traditional kind of desktop web and also some nice interface or gesture kind of activities there. But I'm going to keep it simple. So I'm going to go here to the on click. So what I want to do is when this item is triggered, I want it to do something on click. In this case, I'm going to go alert, hello world. Okay, so that's all it is an item is a pointer and it has a set of different behaviors. And based on that behavior, we can then trigger some JavaScript. Now I'm putting an alert hello, but guess what? We could create our own JavaScript here. In fact, you know what? Let me make that fun. So this is boring alerts. Boring. Let's go ahead and edit a JavaScript action. I'm going to add in there. I'm going to go message action. And I'm going to go through this and I'm going to go ahead and add something simple, but any kind of behaviors can be added to this. So I'm going to go ahead and do our transient message, which I really enjoy using. And I'll go, hello world. And I'm going to go ahead and click OK. So now I have this message action. And instead of doing a boring hello world, I can sit there and say, insert the code to run that action and good to go. And again, this could be an AJAX callback or anything more sophisticated that you happen to see. So now I have this new alert here and I have an action. Now, if I go back to my layout here, still nothing's going on from this standpoint here. What I'd like to do is actually when someone clicks, say, on the last name, this is just artificial, but when they click on last name, what I want it to do is trigger this action or item, which will trigger the appropriate action. So I'm going to go here to my layout. And again, anybody knows a better way to do this, let me know. But what I want to do is I want to insert a, often it's a div or something, but I'm going to use something called span. So I'm going to put a span around this. And I'm going to go here and I'll go span. So I'm basically just wrapping this last name in a HTML tag called span. And I could have done div, but div puts in carriage returns or line feeds. So I want a span here. So the idea is now this span controls everything in the middle of it. In our case, we're just spitting out the last name. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here, going to put a little space here, and I'm going to insert an item in this span, which means anything that's between here, it's going to trigger that item. So let me go ahead and click item, and there's my alert test, and I click OK. So now you'll notice I have span. It has an item there and last name. And so again, I don't have to go out. I can just go right here, and I'm going to click on last. So I'm going to click first on first name and all that. Nothing happens. But watch when I click on here. Oh, you know what? I think because I did it as I need to actually run it in working preview. If I used a standard alert, you would see a standard alert. So I may go back and change that. So we'll go here and check that out. Notice what happened here. It triggered that action JavaScript. Now you'll notice when I click on here, I'm clicking on these other areas. Since these aren't enclosed in that span, it doesn't take it. But if I click, say, on last name Rhodes, here's my message, Higgins, etc. So basically it spit out this line, and when it did, it added a little on-click event for this span right here. So if I click on anything inside that span, it triggers my message here. Now that's pretty boring. And you know what? I'm going to go ahead and just do something real quick. I want to go back to my here just so I can do it in here. I'm going to change my on-click event and I'm going to, instead of doing the message action, I'm just going to say alert, hello world. Cruder, but what it allows me to do is in here when I'm previewing it, it's going to run that JavaScript and it'll work fine from there. Now, that's kind of cool. So you can actually add behaviors to this and trigger that. But the thing you'll notice is that every time I trigger it, it's essentially doing the same thing. So contextually, I'm not sure what I triggered it on. Now, Alpha provides us with a capability of that, and I'm going to show you that next, is that you can feed two items what are called arguments in your ability to do that. So let's go ahead and go back into items here. I think my system went, there we go. Okay, good. It's off doing something. There we go. So I'm going to go back to my items. And I'm going to go into my on-click event here. You can see that's where I'm setting up that item there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go back to my layout first. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this item here, just like we're restarting over. And I'm going to go through the same process where I'm going to insert an item. And I select my item. And you could have multiple of them. But notice what we have here. We have ability to insert arguments in an A5 value attribute. So I'm going to go and say, I want to pass to this item some data. So I'm going to go ahead and put in here last name, and actually all I need is last name here. So what's going to happen is that it's going to take whatever my last name is for each row and insert it and pass it along to this item here. So you can see it looks a little different. We still have our A5 item. This is the item that's going to be triggered, but you'll notice that it's passing along an A5 value, and in this case, it's passing along the last name. I could have that as the unique ID or whatever. I just happen to pick the same one there. So what this allows you to do is basically Alpha will detect what item they click on and pass along with it some other data. So now we can go back to our item here and we can look at this. Currently, I'm just doing alert hello world, but notice this up here. So we can see that we can grab, for instance, the value of the A5 attribute in the template. So remember, when I inserted my item right here, I said pass along that last name. So now that that is in there, it's in the V argument here, I can go right here and say, you know what? Let's show the alert and pass to my JavaScript this V information. And the cool thing about that is this could be much more sophisticated JavaScript. So you could be doing an AJAX callback, pass it some items, do a whole bunch of other things from there. So now I have a on-click event, an item that will take that incoming data and do something with it. So we can go to my preview right here. I'm going to click on last name and it click there, and you'll notice, it ran that JavaScript. It took the value for this particular row, and that's the important thing. For this particular row, the last name value, and it gave it to that JavaScript function, and then in that function, I can pull it back out and use it. And that's very important. That's the ability to add that interactivity to know what they're clicking on. Now, this is artificial because in my case, if I go back to my layout, I'm just passing in last name, but most likely what I would probably do is if I had like a unique ID for that row, then what I would do is pass along with that unique ID, like the ID number, so I know for that row, it could then pass that to an AJAX callback or do something along with that. In fact, I can change this. Let's say I want to put, instead of last name, I just want to pass along first name. So I can go here, and what you'll see is when I click here, it's giving me the first name value versus this last name value. So the important thing to realize is that items are just triggers for JavaScript. You define the JavaScript based on the behavior you would want it to be triggered. You then insert that item into your HTML, and I'm going to show you this again in a few moments, where you want it to take place. And then you can also pass along essentially argument or value information so that your JavaScript can then take that information and know what's been clicked on. And to show you some flexibility on this, I'm going to go back into my VB template here. I'm going to go to my items. I'll add an item. I'll just do the same thing here just so it's the same. And I'll go to my on-click, and I'm just going to say alert hello world. Okay. Now I'm going to go to my template here, and you'll see, for instance, hey, check this out. I already have a tag here called H1. So let me preview this. You'll see that in here, I've got this H1 right here. And so what I want to do is when I click on that, I want to run that item. So I'll go back to my layout, and all I have to do is go right here and insert that item. And now when I go back to my preview, if I click on my item, anywhere in this header text right here. So for instance, I could go back here and I don't want to do it on the day. I want them when they actually click on here. If I go back to my layout, and you'll see there's a card image class right here, a div that holds my card. So this is a div that holds that information. So let's go here, and I'm just going to go right here, and I'm going to insert my item right here. And now when I go to my preview, if I click on the header, you'll see it's triggering that item. And when I trigger it again, as I did before, I could pass it the unique ID of what this card is and things along those lines. So these buttons right here, right now, they don't do anything. Well, let's go ahead and go back in. I can go to my layout. Here's my button right there. I'm going to go ahead and insert my item here, alert test. So now when I click on this button, it's going to run this JavaScript. And let's go ahead and do that. And I'm going to click button 2, nothing happens, but button 1, you'll see that happens there. And as I click on these buttons, it's doing the same action, but not to be too redundant, you could pass in at the unique ID. So when I click this button, I would know, oh, it's record number 3, go do whatever I need to do from there. So as you can see, items take it to the next level. You start with just basically data and HTML being merged, but now you can go in with this and create those kind of capabilities here. And you have the full flexibility to use any kind of JavaScript action to say update maps, do AJAX callbacks, navigation, do all these kind of things here. So it really is a lot of fun. And the key things for you to understand is that when you add the, sorry, if I go back here, when I add my item in there, if I insert an item, I not only can insert the item, but also arguments and A5 attributes. And there's different ways to handle that. And you can see what will happen from there. And there's, if you go back to home here, click here, there's some more documentation on the details of items and other pieces from there. So that's the fabulous ViewBox control. So as you can see, especially with the new templates, I can make really great looking templates. But also more importantly is now I can trap when people click on things. So even showing right here, notice you have like this is a series of rows, sort of like a list control. And when the person touches one of these or clicks on it or swipes, you want to take behavior. And so it's a common pattern. And now you can make that dynamic in terms of items and those pieces that go from there. So that's my demonstration for today. It has to do with view boxes and items. They're a lot of fun. They're really cool. The one thing I wanted to show you is that inside here, you can just right within the view box, you can be playing with it. You don't even have to go out to the UX at all. And you can do, test out items. You notice my little transient message requires it to be running there. So there are certain limitations, for instance, if you have some more sophisticated action JavaScript, it may not trigger when you're here, but at least you can detect to make sure the proper stuff is getting hit and the proper values are going out from there. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to Dave for any questions that people may have.
That's right. Thank you very much. So the first question has to do with A5 items. So you had A5 item, you had A5 value, which you could use to pass along one or more values, I suspect, to your script. But
yes,
it seemed that when you were in that insert dialog box and you insert an item, it said insert an item argument. Can you talk a little bit about what an item argument is and how it's different than, say, an A5 value?
Okay, so arguments, an A5 attribute is like a single value, but you can post multiple arguments and pieces that go into it. And why don't we do this? Why don't I do an argument follow-up next week with a little more detail on that, just to kind of reinforce what we've done today.
That sounds great.
I wanted to focus on this because most of the time this is all you need. You just basically need like, what's the ID of the row I'm on, or what's the person's name because I want to update another thing or something like that. So your A5 attribute is very easy. You just basically put in curly brackets, the name, and make sure in JavaScript, remember, is very case sensitive. So it needs to be exactly what you want there. And you'll notice this is what it's going to insert here. So you don't actually have to do it. You can eventually, once you kind of get an understanding, you could essentially almost type this into the system, but this prevents like, fat finger errors kind of things from there. So you can see that's how you do it from there. But I'll come back and explore arguments a little bit more because there is a subtle difference between them, and I'm going to go over that next time.
Excellent. Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Two people asked basically the same question. The first one said, oh, you're using a view box, not a list. And then the other person asked or stated, if they're to understand correctly, view boxes are generally used to display data, not generally for most data entry. Is that correct? Would that be a fair
That is correct.
characterization? Okay.
That's a very good. So list controls are like mega controls. Basically it does three things. Number one is it connects to a backend data source, like a view box here. So it talks to a backend data source. Two, it does display of that data through a list interface. And again, there's a huge amount of flexibility. It's a much more complex, much more involved control, but you have the basic same concept. Then number three, very important, is that it manages offline data. So it handles sort of bringing down the data, storing as JSON, tracking the edits, and then doing that synchronization back to it. So it does a lot of heavy lifting, and thus it's a pretty heavy duty control. often you have where you just want to bring down and display some data. So a list, ViewBox is much more appropriate for that, but you still want to have some interactivity with it. It's really not meant to edit data per se, because the ViewBox doesn't have the ability to manage offline data or do anything along those lines. But it could be used as an editing interface because maybe you're just clicking buttons and if I can put any JavaScript I want in here. So let's say I had a list control, and there's some examples on this, and then I use a ViewBox to display the information in that list control. You can do that. And what's kind of cool about that is then you could write the data back to the list control and have it do all there. So you could technically create a full editing interface with a ViewBox. And in fact, we've used it ourselves for things like numeric keypads and things like that. But most of the time we're using it really to display data and then add some elements of interactivity to it to allow the person to interact with it and do something, either select a record or update something else in the system. But the really cool thing I love is just, it's all HTML and CSS, so you can bring in any, I pulled it from this load layout template here, but there's nothing magical about it. It's just a set of HTML and CSS. In fact, you don't even need the latest release to be able to use these. You can copy the HTML and CSS into previous releases and it'll work fine. And again, our goal is to add a whole bunch more in here so you have these really beautiful. And notice too, it's got interactivity because of the way CSS works. You can have like cool things like when you hover over it, it pops up the buttons. So doing that in like a UX control would be a very difficult process. By the way, these interfaces are available in the list control. So if you do want to use these interfaces in list control, you can. But the other thing, and this is the most important thing for you to realize, is that a ViewBox is a super lightweight control, meaning that it really is small and it takes up very little space on your UX. So therefore it downloads really quickly. It doesn't take up a lot of memory, so the browser or the mobile device doesn't have to spend a lot of effort managing it. And it is fast, super duper fast, because it doesn't have all the overhead of doing a whole bunch of other things. All it's doing is saying, give me the data, let me merge it and show it to the user. That's all it does. So it uses some very optimized routines to do that. So you'll see the render time for ViewBoxes are lightning fast. And ViewBoxes, you can update the data on the fly. So if you want to have more dynamic interface, you can say, okay, update my JSON and now update my ViewBox, and the ViewBox will like, boom, all of a sudden refresh that and you'll see a new updated interface based on that new data. So a lot of really cool things you can do with that to create dynamic interfaces for your users.
Excellent. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
We had a couple questions about what sort of the typical use cases might be for a ViewBox, and I want to show you one.
Yes, excellent. Thank you.
I'm going to present something today. I feel so special.
Yeah, awesome. You're too bored on Transform Tuesdays. Got to creep into mine, huh, pal? Huh?
Exactly. And this is actually Transform related.
Look how
Data in this
beautiful
application is coming from Transform. And this is a dashboard. And what ViewBoxes are great for are building out these dashboard widgets. So for example,
Yes.
this calculates the number of tickets that are still open, the number of pending review, and the number that have been closed. We did that as a ViewBox control. This is just a little clock control. We did that as a ViewBox control. And then coming down here, let me see if I can scroll in here. Maybe I can, maybe I can't. Well, we had another one, a weather widget, which actually someone did a presentation on, a video on last week. But that's also, we did that as a ViewBox control as well. So they're really handy, certainly for dashboard widgets. But like Dion said, for doing lots of data entry, that's not really what their purpose is for. For that, you're going to want a list.
Yeah.
So
the creativity of this is just staggeringly awesome.
Yeah. All right, let me hand you back control, but
sure.
Before I do, let me grab the next question, and that is, for data sources, can you use data sources that aren't SQL or static? Can you use like a third-party data source? Like, can you get data from Stripe or Twilio or some other API?
Absolutely. Let me explore that a little bit and show you. That's a great question. The answer is absolutely.
Let me go ahead and give you back control. Okay.
So, two things. One, before I get off this, I wanted to show you, let's say you created a fabulous, like what Dave just showed. Let's say you had a little cool little ViewBox that merged some JSON data and made like a status indicator or something like that. Well, remember, I can click here, or I can click on this and say, save my selected controls in a library. And now that ViewBox can be saved in my library, either in the local project or at a global level. So let's say next week you go, you know what, I really need one of those widgets. Great. Just go in here and extract, you can go back in here and say menu, load controls from library, pick your widget, put it in there, boom, it's in here. You just go in and make the little tweaks you need to, maybe connect it to a different data source or something like that, but you don't have to recreate the wheel and recreate this whole thing. Now, alternatively, you can, of course, just right click here and copy that control onto the clipboard, go somewhere and paste it. But I like having it in the control library because you'll promote reuse, because you don't go, God, what project did that do that widget on? No, I've got a standard set of widgets. And you create very consistent user interfaces because you're reusing things over and over. So that's a really cool capability there. Now, as Dave mentioned in a few moments, and what they were asking is the data source. So currently I use static just because it's easy. But you'll see we have one called REST API, and we did a demonstration. I think it's about 4 weeks ago, we actually showed how using a REST API with a ViewBox here to present the data. So with a REST API, and the world is going to REST APIs, what will happen is this ViewBox will call back to Stripe or Twilio or any of these other APIs and grab data from that. Now again, ViewBox is oriented around the consumption of data, but you can use obviously Action JavaScript to create calls that send data back to a backend API. And that's kind of where the world's going. As you noticed, one of the major improvements in the last year is the fact that Alpha now has the ability to produce and consume web APIs. So you can actually take an Alpha and create an API with it, and therefore you could even consume APIs within your own system, which is very powerful for many different reasons. So you can use the REST API. You can make the call either from the server or directly from the client, and that's kind of a cool thing from a performance standpoint, is you can cut out the middleman, meaning that it doesn't, let's say you have a web browser, it doesn't have to go back to the Alpha server and then the Alpha server call the API and then come back. Although there are some times when you want to do that for audit trails and other things like that. But you could actually have the web browser call directly to the API, and thus it reduces the work on your server and it makes it super duper fast. You have an endpoint, this is where you're calling, you get some sample data, and you can do authentication and other things along those lines. So this allows you to call directly to APIs. So like for instance, that weather interface, there'll be an API endpoint to call and get that weather data, bring it back as JSON, and then once you have that JSON, you can then just lay it out however you want to, using the layout, and also in the items provide interactivity to that from there. So you can get it from a list control, which is really powerful. The nice thing about the list control, by the way, is that if you get it from a list control, the list control could be offline. So it could run back, grab a whole bunch of data, go offline. Now the user's working with their system offline, say on a mobile device, and on there we have a ViewBox targeting the list. So the list isn't going back to the service, it's just going to the list box, and the list box already has the data locally. But you can also do JavaScript functions, as I shown today, static. You could make direct database queries. If you know you're going to be connected, you could call the database directly to get your JSON. Custom, and then custom is you can create your own Xbasic function on the backend server that allows it to generate the JSON and send it back. So there's a number of different ways you can do it. So the ViewBox is very flexible in terms of how you do that. But per your question, REST API is going to be your go-to, and we're going to be using that a lot more because, it's just simple. You got a REST API and it can go directly to that API, and there's a lot of really super flexible things you can do within that. And with REST APIs, you can do authentication, so you can provide it, and I don't have any named providers in here, but you can set up so that it authenticates that API call, so that if it's a API that's secure, you'll still be able to exercise that API. Great question, thank you.
Excellent. So now a somewhat unrelated question, and it has to do with if you've got a web application, can you use it to open up an Excel spreadsheet? Or I guess another way of saying it is, if you want to open an Excel spreadsheet from a web application, what might you do?
Well, man, what I've seen is you can
There are some
download it.
extensions for browsers that will let you launch it, but of
Yeah,
course your users would have to install that.
that extension there. On the mobile phone, you can use PhoneGap plugins, and there's other capabilities to allow you to
Right.
view native files. So,
Mm.
and what's nice is a lot of that stuff that's going on mobile is sequencing back to the web browsers running on desktops, because I think everybody has the view down the road that it's an app world, and that desktops will just be apps that are delivered through the browsers and things like that. I don't know of any personally that allow you to do that, but they're moving that direction. In fact, I saw something really cool, Dave. You'll find this kind of intriguing, and I think it
Okay.
opens up a lot of neat stuff down the road. But have you heard of Web USB?
Web USB, I have not.
It is really cool.
All right,
Basically,
what is
it's
this?
built into Chromium. There's a lot of security things around it, but it basically allows your web browser to directly talk to a USB port and exercise that USB port. So the example I saw was
Oh, like you could do point of sale cash register. You could do a million things probably with something like that.
exactly, and you don't
Wow.
need the desktop anymore. It could be a Chromebook and then it goes right to that USB port. Now there's a lot of rules around it. The devices, it will only connect to certain devices. Where I saw it was someone had a microcontroller, and
Yeah.
they were able to talk directly from the web browser directly to the microcontroller without going through the operating system. So you could, for instance, have like a
Like an
widget that
Arduino or
measures
something like that? Is that what you mean by?
exactly. So let's
Okay,
say you
yeah.
had like a great example is, let's say we had, and this kind of just goes to show you where all this stuff's going to, is let's say I had that temperature control. Now that's going to
Sure.
a web API, but I could
Right.
say, hey, no, call a USB port, call a temperature sensor on that USB port, and then merge that data back into my weather control to show the temperature and whatever humidity, et cetera, from there. So it's really cool. So sorry, I kind of off
Wow.
topic, but we're starting to see the world, and you can even see it in the iOS world, where they're working on allowing people to run iOS apps on Mac desktops using over next year, they're just merging that whole ecosystem together. So the
Okay.
developers have to create once, and you'll see the same thing. Now,
Yeah.
back to the original question, there may be some Chrome plugins that are available that allow you to do that. But again, as Dave said, you'd have to require that plugin, but often you can detect whether that plugin exists or that extension exists before you trigger it, and then give the user a warning saying, hey, you have to have this kind of scenario there.
Right. With
So
a maybe even with a handy link of where to get it. So that's
exactly.
nice. Okay, so here is I like this question a lot. Here's a person who wants to use some APIs, but all of the APIs where they give the sample code, it's all in Node.js. And they said, I
Ah,
heard that Alpha supports Node.js, but where do I even start learning how to use that? Where do I start digging in? Probably documentation would be a good place to start talking in. So if you're out there,
voila!
if you
I
could
always
start
have
with
it open.
that. But I know you've
Um,
messed around a little bit with Node.js, I believe. Is that correct? And
yeah, I've
maybe
done
you
a
could
little
point
bit
us in
here,
a. You've dabbled. All
and
right. Can you?
I use this link right here. So let me grab that, copy that, and I'm going to put that in the chat window here. So there's the world now. Oh, wait. Oh, look at that. Already beat me to it, Sarah. Jeez, so fast. Hey, well, I was talking,
Excellent.
so it's no
All
fair.
right.
So the world as it sits today there's great news, and then there's great news.
Oh,
Actually, there's good news and there's great news. Good news is right now today, with a few steps following these procedures, you can basically take that node module and you can wrap it, and then that node module will then do the calls out and do whatever it is. And there's a very vibrant, huge node community that have all these pre-made, a lot of good documentation. It's just going to reduce the amount of code you need to do. But today in our world now, Alpha from a back-end system only understands Xbasic. So what you need to do is basically wrap your node module and then kind of install it. And this goes through all those steps and how to do that from here. So you can watch there. And it's not hard. It's just a few extra steps. Now, what's being worked on right now is the ability for you to bypass the whole, say, wrapping step, where you can just install the node module on an Alpha server, and from your UI make direct calls, like have a button that makes a direct call to that Node module, and then the data comes right back. So we're kind of cutting out the middleman is what we're doing here, because it's crazy Bob's and we slice prices and we cut out the middleman to make you more successful. So we're cutting that out just to reduce it. And it's also a speed layer. You know, it's one less thing the system does. You know, Node's super duper fast. It's built for high transactional systems. It's not built for a bunch of competition, but it's built for very fast interfaces and things like that. Now, really cool is that we're not only going to be supporting Node.js, but also Python. So if you wanted to call a Python script, and Python has an enormous amount of also libraries and pre-made code and a lot of flexible stuff. And there's a billion Python coders out there. There's a billion Node programmers. So if you need help doing something a little more sophisticated, it's going to be easier for you to engage those people, bring their code in and wrap it in and bring it into your alpha system there. So this is your step for right now. And again, it's not very hard. It's step 1, 2, 3, and there's some really good documentation that has been put together that shows it. But very soon, you know, later this year is kind of the target. We're going to be able to kind of cut out the middleman, and you'll be able to basically install a Node module on your server and then be able to make directly calls to it. And so you'll have to do a little education on how to install Node modules. We install the Node, essentially Node.js program on the alpha server. So it's already built in to your development environment and the server. So we've already done that part for you. But you're still going to have to learn a little bit. Like you'll notice that you basically bring in Node modules. It's through something called npm. It downloads and put those files in your system. So there's some sort of, I call it administrivia, logistics kind of thing you have to go through. But again, very, very straightforward, very easy to do. And this is a great example of it. This is a standard library, so you don't have to worry about anything more sophisticated. But the cool thing now is that, yeah, you find a great Node module, you'll be able to drop it onto your server, do a little wrapping exercise and start using it, or very soon be able to do it. By the way, that it's sooner than later, and the reason why is that basic technology is working. We've had Node in there for a while. What we're working on, and this is again part of Alpha Anywhere's hallmark in terms of how our developers view the world. Right now, we've got it working where you can do that, but the question is, okay, how do I debug that? And how do I, like, if I pass something to the Python or the Node, then how do I see what goes on there? So what's going on is they're updating the development environment, doing a whole bunch of other things to kind of make your life easier. So when you get ready to do this, it's going to be a Xbasic style, very easy with, you know, capabilities into it. So we're really, the part of it is really the usability, not the technical feasibility. That's already up and running. It's the usability factor that we're working on it to make it easy for you to say, here, I've got a Python script, I put it in my system, I then create a button, I call that. But what if it doesn't go right? Well, then how do I find out what's going on? What can I, you know, can I put in print statements, other things like that? So they're just refining that to make your life easier. So when we do go down that road, you'll be able to go. And I'm really excited because it opens up a lot more developers who can use our system, and more importantly, a lot of developers you can tap into to help you do more sophisticated, more complicated things without you having to figure out how to translate it into Xbasic or do other things along those lines. Very exciting stuff and great question.
Great, thank you, Dion. So the next question has to do with the IIS Application Server, actually technically called the Alpha Anywhere Application Server for IIS. And the question is this: can I still use Xbasic?
Yes.
And the answer is yes, but I guess it's actually really kind of a good question, because when we first came out with the Alpha Anywhere Application Server for IIS, I was wondering the same thing. And really the benefit of using the IIS version of the server is that it handles sort of the first line requests for the pages. But when that page ends up having some Xbasic code in it that needs to be executed server side, IIS actually hands that over to the Alpha Anywhere Application Server for IIS, which does whatever calculation it needs to do or whatever programming code needs to be executed, and then hands control back over to the IIS app server. So the answer is yes, you could still use Xbasic. Of course, because it is IIS, you could also use other server-side languages in it as well. So great question. Thank you for asking.
Yes, thank you.
Let me see. That might be it. Oh, just a quick question here. Can you call a remote Node server, not the one that Alpha installed?
Great question. I don't know if you can do that. I'd have to look into that at this time. Everything
Okay.
I've seen is local, on the Node server, Node
Right.
process that's running on our server. So I'd have to check into that.
Okay. Great. Let me see. That might be it for questions, which means that the amount of questions and the amount of time were more or less the right
Yeah,
amount for
great.
today.
No, thank you, everybody.
Let me make sure I didn't miss one though here. We'll take a quick look. Got that one. So there's a suggestion for someone who would like us to show off maybe in a future webinar. This person's brand new. Uh, the differences, say, between the list control and the ViewBox control and other types of controls that go into UX is sort of like, I guess I wouldn't call it an in-depth, but it's not high level either, sort of an in-between view of what are those controls over there on the left-hand side when you're in the UX controllers.
Gotcha. Yep.
Maybe just
So you go
like
right
that.
here, all these bad boys.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
because
would
there's
be
some cool
great.
ones in here too.
Yeah.
There's a lot of fun ones.
That would make a nice little webinar because there's things in there that I have not seen or haven't seen in a while and forgot were there. So
Got it. Yeah, here's our new weather control right there.
weather widget, yeah, in the pre-release. Great. Well, if that's it, Dion, I want to thank you very much. I want to thank
Thank
everyone
you.
who attended, especially those of you who asked questions to help keep our sessions lively. If you do have any future questions before next week, go ahead and send them to guides, GUIDES, at alphasoftware.com. There are a team of people here monitoring that email who are happy to get back to you. So thanks again, and hope to see you next Wednesday. Take care and goodbye.